I think I remember the first time we spoke of the expedition, and the real start of the expedition was when Dad sent through just a photo of this mountain, Mount Doonerak.
Now, the mountain basically is this incredibly slabby, front-sided mountain. They call it the Matterhorn of the Koyukuk. So it's got a real imposing shape to it.
Researching more about the area, the gates of the Arctic National Park, we just found that this trip would be doable, but we'd have to utilise the river.
The access is nearly impossible. There's sheer sides on all sides. There's two rivers that come around either flank. The gorges are really steep. There's no way you can get in by aircraft, and it's too far from civilization to get in by chopper. So the only way we could get to Mount Doonerak was by doing a high altitude drop off in an alpine lake, inflate kayaks, and then our plan was to have a 2-day approach, get to the base, and then attack the mountain. Drawing up this incredibly complex adventure with many moving parts. The dream was built, and now all we had to do was step into it, work hard and make it happen.
As we took off from Bettles, it was a bit of a surreal feeling leaving our last glimpse of civilization behind.
The northern flight was just magical. You know, these incredibly wet tundra lands, tough rolling hills that then led into steep gorges with complicated river systems, and then up into the higher gorges where we had waterfalls and rapids. The plane basically went due north. We could see the little compass on the dash, and then just behind the compass, this little bump on the horizon that was Mount Doonerak.
I guess this nervousness just started growing in both of our bellies as we began to see this mountain emerge in the distance. This mountain that we'd looked at so many times on topographic maps and old photos, but now it was right there.
Seeing Mount Doonerak for the first time was amazing. As we banked the aircraft around the flank of the mountain, you could see these incredibly strong sides leading up to this incredible cathedral-like rock, and then into slabby sheer cliffs, all covered in loose shale, ice and snow. Landed on Summit Lake at well over 6,500 feet, unloaded all our gear into this wet, sticky tundra, realising immediately that we were being left in an environment that was going to be tough to cross. The plane took off, and we've got this incredible silence as we suddenly realised for the first time we're alone, we've stepped into the dream, and the only way home is through our own little legs. So we inflated our kayaks and loaded them up with all the gear and had about a kilometre paddle before we hit our first obstacle.
And encountered a pretty horrible marshland full of knee-deep mud, thawing permafrost, and just these labyrinths of frigid cold streams that we'd have to navigate our way through.
The warming of Alaska and the globe generally has allowed the permafrost to no longer be permanently frozen. It's very difficult to cover. To make even a kilometre an hour, you're doing well over this stuff.
Trying to be as light as a breeze. The Queen of Arden, Friday morning. The Queen of Arden, Friday morning.
On every expedition there's a day that is exceptionally hard, the crux of the expedition.
Day 2 was the crux day. We made mistakes that really set us up for a very difficult expedition and required a lot of clawing back and hard work to make sure that we got home safely. We had just found it deep enough to kayak properly and very nearly got flipped by this eddy and a rock. I managed to get to the bank, yell a warning to Kit, just as he got flipped out of the kayak and trapped underneath it, trying to hang on to his gear. I managed to get to him, pull him out, get his kayak to shore, but in the process flipped my kayak with the sat phone in a dry bag that wasn't cinched down properly. The immediate risk there was we lost complete contact with the outside world. The sat phone was drowned.
Shortly after, we found that the river dropped into this steep, bottomless gorge that was just unpassable.
So we had to portage, and then begun one of the toughest portages of the trip. But by the end of that day, we had got all our gear forward, set tent on the edge of the escarpment, and could see the valley floor below. That night, I went to work again on the satellite phone, to no avail.
Waking up early the next morning, we looked down at the valley floor and we knew we had a big day to get all our gear down a couple thousand feet.
The biggest single obstacle we knew on this journey was going to be this wall that we were on.
Setting out, it became apparent really early on that this was going to be super hard. Immediately we encountered some high-grade rock scrambling with about 30 kilos on your back.
Just had this horrible slate, chossy rock that slid, cracked, big chunks coming away, and it just didn't feel safe. We had to do the wall 5 times. So climb down with 30 kilos, climb up unloaded, climb down with another 30 kilos, climb up unloaded, and then climb down for a 5th time with 30 kilos. It was a 10-hour day. We covered 1.7 kilometers.
We were completely depleted by the time we got to the valley floor, and we just collapsed, exhausted.
It was very clear to us both that the punishment our bodies were taking through the portaging was just not sustainable. If we didn't find a way to make distance, we weren't going to get home. The mistakes we'd made and the difficulty of making distance led us at the end of day 3 to the horrible realisation just getting home safely and without loss of life might have to be the expedition on this one. The climb started to become less important as we realised we didn't have safe communication with home, and potentially the river was way more dangerous than we'd expected.
Camping in the valley, it was apparent there was more wildlife.
We started to realise there were other creatures around us. We recognised that we had to change the way we were attacking Alaska. To do it on foot and portaging was just not physically possible. We still had over 230 kilometres of river before we got to Bettles. We had to find a better way of making distance.
And we both knew that meant entering the river and risking it.
So with some trepidation, we put the kayaks into the river, loaded up and tackled the first rapid. So the valley turned west, we were bashing away over rapids, and then suddenly there she was, Mount Doonerak, towering above us. An incredibly beautiful looking mountain with these incredibly sheer sides.
It was just as stunning from the ground as it was from the air, and it was really surreal to see it.
Our objective, climbing Mount Doonerak, was so close, sitting right above us, and yet it was completely out of reach. Ironically, that night we were camped right at the base where we were planning to approach the climb up Mount Doonerak, this beautiful remote peak, and yet we were unable to do so, not safely, without a sat phone and no contact now for 4 days with the outside world. We realised our number one goal was to get out and let our family know we were alive and well. It was really hard looking up at this beautiful mountain with the mist swirling around its upper reaches, questioning, have we made the right decision?
Those thoughts of doubt start creeping in. Was it doable? Could we just go for it and risk it?
But deep in your heart knowing that the number one thing was to get out alive and well. We'd have to come back another day and climb this incredible peak. It was a desperate feeling in the beginning of that morning, loading the kayaks up, putting them into the river, turning our backs on Mount Doonerak. This mountain that we had worked so hard to get to, and yet through one simple mistake, let slip through our fingers.
As soon as you enter back into rapids, you get this surreal feeling of being thrown down a bowling alley, dodging car-sized blocks and traversing really fast and angry streams of water. Flying around a corner, we encountered a fairly aggressive rapid field.
I got launched sideways, managed to stay upright and then get around this big chunk of rock, and then yelled a warning to Kit. Turned around to see him getting airborne, launched sideways and ripped out of the kayak.
Underwater, I just remember this really intense cold rush of water, saturating every layer I had on and really just ragdolling me around as I tried to hold on to the kayak.
But then the force of the river ripped it out of his grasp. Realising immediately we were in a sudden survival situation if we lost that kayak. Half our food, our tent was gone with that kayak if we lost it. I jumped into the rapid, swam out into the middle of the river, and I managed to get a hand on it. I got to the shore, dragged it up, and by then Kit had just reached me, realising how close we were to a complete disaster.
All of a sudden, it was as if the valley just spatters out into a bigger, slower moving river.
For the first time, we had sections between the rapids of meandering slow river. We suddenly realised as we saw the gates of the Arctic formation for which this area is named in front of us, that we were slowly getting to a less dangerous part of the journey.
Seeing it was a momentous occasion as it marked the start of the big river and our journey home.
Silence for the first time. That crazy, mad roaring of the river was gone.
Every now and then, the silence of the landscape would be broken by a distant rumble.
Finally, we started to make real miles, and the mountain range behind us started to go from steep crags, ice covered, to smaller mountains with no ice, and then finally into rolling hills as we started to approach the southern reaches of the Brookes Range. Coming around a bend in the river with Kit a boat length behind me, I saw movement on the right-hand bank, flared the kayak and faced the movement, realising it was a big male bear.
Eating berries, it didn't seem as if it was aggressive or even interested in us. It wasn't until we were parallel moving with the current that its whole demeanour changed.
Before we knew it, the bear was in full charge, moving this incredible bulk. I'd say he was 350 to 400 kilos at incredible pace, his feet driving gravel out behind him.
Within a split second, it had closed in the 40 metres and was at the water.
My initial thought was the river is going to save us. He's not going to come into the river. That was soon dispelled as his body hit the river at force. There's a bow wave that came out in front of his body that went straight under the kayak. And when he hit the water, it was very hard to see this ending any other way than with violence. I was about 15 feet from the edge and he took a stroke towards me. When he took his first stroke, I remember my heart sinking, realising that sitting here in an inflatable kayak, things were going to get bad real fast. He took a stroke and pushed his whole body forward, and then there was a big rush of air as he looked at me and for some unexplainable reason stopped his charge. It was so violent and so unexpected that when it was over, Kit and I, not really grasping the situation, laughed it off. But later at night, both of us woke up in sweats, realising how close we'd come to death by grizzly. There's a slow monotony to a flat river journey. Every stroke of the paddle, you're getting closer and closer to civilization, but it takes time.
It was our last day in Gates of the Arctic National Park, and we were planning to make the big push to Bettles that day.
Despite the frosty morning, we soon warmed up because to cover just 5 kilometres we would paddle up to 20. The meandering of the river was just absolutely crazy. Like the end of a novel that you've enjoyed so much, Alaska held us in its grasp, and we felt, both of us, that despite wanting to get home, wanting to get to civilization, to let family know we're alive and well, there was a real sadness at leaving the joy of such raw wilderness behind us in our wake. After such an amazing journey in this pristine wilderness, our ears very quickly picked up the unnatural sound of an engine in the distance. Pretty soon that engine turned into the roar of a light aircraft and the end of our period without man. Coming into Battles was amazing in that we realised, despite all of the challenges, all the mistakes we'd made, we'd managed to resurrect this journey and get ourselves out in one piece.
Over 250 kilometres of river, rapids and portaging had led us to this point.
This father and son adventure was now at an end and we'd survived. Not climbing Doonerak was obviously a crushing blow, but the bear put that all in perspective. We were so glad to be alive and well as a father and son team in one of the last great wildernesses on the planet. Adventure's important because it's what gets you out of bed. If you don't have a dream or an adventure on the horizon, you're not going to spring out of bed and work harder, play harder. You're not going to develop skill sets. You're not going to stretch yourself.
You give up the luxuries of being able to control and step into an environment that is unpredictable and wild.
Adventuring with your son or with your daughter is absolutely crucial to getting away from the noise of urban life, getting away from the screens, getting off the sofa and exploring your communication in a tent at the end of the day after a tough day, exploring decision making under pressure, exploring the beauty together and realising that to enrich those relationships, adventure is absolutely crucial.